And if anyone doesn't want their likeness to be displayed, you can just turn off your video. When we we'll post the presentation on our website, on our YouTube channel, but we're typically just posting the presenter, so it doesn't have the big screen of all our little boxes. So you don't really need to worry about it, but you feel free to turn off your video if you are. And I'm going to share my screen if we can find it.
Welcome, Craig Patterson.
Okay, so you might be seeing our land acknowledgement, hopefully. Katie, are you ready to take it away?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. So just a quick comment about this section of our program. We acknowledge that and are grateful for the acknowledgement that we are using from Grandma Esther and Stutzman, and we acknowledge also that our intention is to go to greater depth in this focus, and we are working up to a CRA that will be focused in on the land acknowledgement. It's coming in the future, but we encourage everyone to give it some thought and be thinking about it and how, you know, what that might mean to you in terms of expanding and deepening this focus. So with that said, I invite all of you to, or any of you, to help read the acknowledgement. And usually, you know, it's like one paragraph per person until we get to the end. And the acknowledgement also includes the part about the culpability down at the end. So we'll see how it flows. People just take a piece, take a paragraph, and we'll go from there. So anyone want to start us out?
I'll go.
Thank you.
This is the land of the Kalapuya Nation, stretching from the Umpqua River to the south and northward to the falls at Oregon City. 3 dialects of the language were spoken throughout the Willamette Valley, with 12 or so distinct groups within this area. Although Kalapuya people were primarily removed to reservations at Siletz and Grand Ronde, they remain aware of their rich heritage and traditions on this land. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, which we call home, the Kalapuya people, and we pay our respect to the elders, both past and present.
Anyone else?
Okay, acknowledgement of our culpability. Catastrophic epidemics of infectious diseases such as malaria and smallpox occurred after the Kalapuya contracted diseases from the white explorers, traders, and missionaries who entered the region. These diseases were endemic among the Europeans and Americans, but the Native Americans didn't have immunity to them and died at a high rate as a result. Prior to contact with white explorers, traders, and missionaries, the Kalapuya population numbered as many as 15,000 people. By 1849, the remaining Kalapuyan population was estimated at just 60 souls, with those survivors living in the most dire of conditions. Contemporary estimates suggest the total of the various Kalapuya peoples is closer to 600.
Thank you everyone for reading and hopefully feeling a bit of this piece. And now if there are people that are living where in another area where there were perhaps other tribes before us and would like to share where it is and who the tribe is, now's the time to share that.
I'm on the Confederated Tribes of the Kusloaram Isla.
Yeah, yes, I will acknowledge the Umpqua and the Rogue and the Coos.
Thanks, everybody. As Katie mentioned, we're planning on a program on land acknowledgements, and perhaps we might touch on to land back and other sort of associated things. We're looking at May for that, so that's probably when that'll happen. But I put an article into the chat. It's quite good and it references some other stuff. I would encourage folks to take a look at that, and that would be good sort of reading prior to May. And one of the things, I mean, we've been in a different groups just talking about this a bit. Sometimes land acknowledgements, if they're not done well, they end up just really being performative and also can undermine sort of indigenous sovereignty and other things like that. So they can actually be more harmful than helpful. So ours is trying to be better along that way, but maybe it still has a ways to go. But we'll have a good conversation on that in a couple of months. And then is Rich keep joining. David has put some items in the chat for announcements. I'll cover them as well. So coming up next month on the 11th, Ben Price, who is one of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund CELDEF organizers, he is the author of How Wealth Rules the World, a book that we given a bit of attention to, is giving a webinar, like an hour and a half one. And then there's Virtual Democracy, I think the same day, almost right after, in Yamhill County. Since it's virtual, you can attend wherever you are. And Democracy School is pretty cool. It's very much covers the sort of the foundational underpinnings of the work we do and why we feel the system is rigged as it stands, and why the community rights approach is valid. And then I think we have one other thing going on. Yeah, those are the two main ones. So okay, well,
I have one announcement, Rob.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
The next CRA is going to tie up all this. I don't know if you were going to mention that, but the next CRA is going to be on water quality. And we have a local self-taught scientist out here in Deadwood who's been part of the Siuslaw Soil and Water Conservation Board, but he's studied and he really knows the waters, and he's going to talk about water quality.
Who's that,
Okay.
Michelle?
That's Ray Kinney.
Oh, cool.
That will sort of round out our Watershed series. And if you missed one and you just wish you had been here for it, we will have them all on our Community Rights Linn County YouTube channel. Most of them are there now. Okay, so I am going to give you a little local update about our initiative. So our initiative, we have an initiative, the Lane County Watersheds Bill of Rights, and it's a county-wide initiative. So it's Lane County, not any city in the county, you know, it's not a state initiative. So it's a local Lane County initiative. And it sort of goes, you know, hand in hand with our presentations on watershed, in the sense that we've been talking about some of the threats to watersheds. And here is our response in terms of what we think can be done from a community rights frame to protect our watersheds. And I'm going to give us a little bit of just a quick overview of our initiative, and then we'll get on to the presentation on the Middle Fork. Yeah, so our topic for tonight is the Middle Fork, and we'll get to that shortly. But first, a brief foray into the Lane County Watersheds Bill of Rights, which hopefully you are seeing now.
Yep.
Okay, so well, let's see. Okay, there we go. Let me clear a little clutter on my screen before I start, otherwise I can't see anything. Okay, so the Lane County Watersheds Bill of Rights, we filed it in December of last year. We should have been collecting signatures by now, by about a month or so ago. It was approved for in the sense that it met all of the state's constitutional requirements to be a legitimate countywide initiative. But then at the very last second, an opponent who we think represents sort of industrial interests filed suit to challenge the ballot title at the last minute, which sort of threw a wrench into the works. And so now we're fighting about the ballot title. And the ballot title is an important part of what people see when you're collecting signatures or when you're voting on it. And so we want to get that right. So, see if, okay, so why do we want a watershed bill of rights? So obviously, I think we all understand how essential water is to living, both for humans and for all creatures. And clean water from a healthy watershed is essential. And the health of the watershed is really about determining the health and the quality of the water. We know that existing law is not written to protect the watersheds or the water. The current law may allow it. It basically might regulate how much pollution could be put into our watersheds, but it doesn't keep the watersheds from being polluted, or doesn't protect all of the things that are necessary for a functioning ecosystem. And current law protects harmful corporate activities. And so the one we're all familiar with, because we've had an initiative on this, is aerial spraying. So where a timber company clear cuts parts of the forest, which leads to massive erosion, and that's bad in itself. But then they come back and spray with helicopters herbicides, which then are going to run off into the rivers and into the watershed. So we know that the current corporate activities are bad for the watersheds, and the state law in Oregon basically endorses those activities and prevents us from doing anything about it. So what does our Watershed Bill of Rights do? So basically, it is a rights of nature based initiative. So it gives the watersheds the right to exist and thrive as complex living ecosystems with rights. When we say rights of nature, it means giving elements of nature inherent rights, and not just the rights for the owners of natural property. So like if someone had, 100 acres, as an owner, the current system of law might say, well, they have some rights if somebody damages their property, but that doesn't mean that the nature itself has any rights. And so our initiative would give the watersheds of Lane County actual rights and ecosystems within and so forth. It includes the right to naturally exist, flourish, regenerate, and evolve. And some of that can come down to things like if you're a river having sustainable recharge, or flows that are sufficient to keep fish populations healthy, or clean water that's free of pollution. And it's not on this slide, but one of the things we do is we say that corporations are prohibited from engaging in activities that violates these rights. So if somebody dumps in chemicals into the river, or they spray aerial pesticides, which then flow into the watershed, they are violating the rights of the watershed to be free of pollution, for example. The Bill of Rights says that if the watersheds are damaged, that the violator is on the hook for restoring that, and the cost of that. There also are penalties for however long they are before they have restored the watershed to its healthy state. That's a key part of it. And if my slide would advance, okay. So let's see. Okay, here we go. It also talks about the rights of humans to actual water. Okay, so it says that residents of Lane County have the right to access to clean water, including clean drinking water and affordable domestic water. And then it basically says that local government should adopt protective and effective measures to prevent or remedy actual and potential violations. So what that means, it's more along the precautionary principle, which is that the local government should prevent activities what we think are very likely to cause harm. We don't have to wait until the harm has been committed before government should act. And in fact, this would give residents and the natural elements the ability to challenge local government if they're not adopting these protective measures. And then enforcement. So normally lots of environmental protections can be enforceable by the government, either in this case, local government, and we're talking about a county. But often we know that local government doesn't always, measure up to the job. They are sometimes conflicted by powerful interests and they don't do it. We know that ourselves. And so this gives residents of Lane County, in addition to government, the ability to enforce the law, to essentially take action, to legal action in court, to stop corporate actors that are doing things that violate the rights in the law. And we know, and it also protects any whistleblowers if there are workers who report violations. So that's there, there's lots of technical details, but that's the essence of it. And I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has questions. All
I
right.
have a bone to pick with that definition of precautionary principle, because it says, I think you said something about even if there's not scientific evidence of risk. And I think my understanding of the precautionary principle is they have to prove it's safe. Not the,
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the idea was more that, so you could be right. It's a good topic. But I think sometimes it's like there might not be certainty around something, but if there's something that's high risk, but it's you don't know that it's going to occur, but it could occur. The precautionary principle would suggest that you don't take that action because of the inherent risk. The fact that the consequences, if the risk turns out to be true, are so high that you still should err on the side of caution. But I'm not sure if I have the formal definition. Craig, did you want to weigh in on that, or did you have something else?
Well, something else, actually. I wanted to know how the public forest accord undermines your very efforts, and how are you addressing that?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, one thing that accord did was, at least for the actors involved, basically they said that they weren't going to essentially do anything about certain topics for, I think, a period of like 7 years, which in particular were aerial spraying. So they basically, in order to gain what might be very, small improvements in certain areas, they basically created sacrifice zones out of other areas. That would be my take. I don't know if anybody else wants to give a different response to that.
Well, I think it's far more than that. And
Yeah.
that the fact that people who do try to confront the pollution can be liable for
absolutely
damages.
Craig, you're right. And like we like to say, this is civil disobedience through lawmaking. So it's not risk-free. And we are looking to stir up the hornet's nest because it needs to be stirred up. So this is just, we're well aware that we are confronting settled law. That doesn't make it just.
One thing I might add, this initiative challenges the timber industry, whereas the private forest accord just sets certain changes and limits. But one thing I think that wasn't brought up is that this initiative applies only to government and corporate business entities, and is not applied to private parties and private landowners. And that's obviously a missing part, because private landowners can cause all sorts of problems and damages to nature and cause all sorts of pollution. But we decided to limit our opposition by limiting it to that for now. But the bigger goal is protecting all of nature from all inputs, really. The private forest accord is a really complex thing. We could spend the rest of the time on of this session on it for sure, and then there'd be no presentation on the Middle Fork of the Willamette. So I'm glad to address that more in the future if people are wanting to.
Yeah, right. One thing I'll add before we move on, because I think we do need to have time for the presentation for tonight, but one of the things both Lincoln County found, and that, in terms of having an initiative to ban aerial pesticides, okay, which is sort of what was passed in Lincoln County, and what we were working on with our own aerial spray ban, is at least in Lincoln County, the judge ruled that their law, which the voters passed, in other words, it won at the ballot box, the judge ruled that it couldn't be in effect because it was preempted by state law, where local governments can't ban aerial pesticides. And so we know that in our county, that if we were to, again, try to ban aerial pesticides by initiative, we would find the same fate. But the preemption, the state preemption that doesn't let you do that, basically says that local governments can't regulate pesticide use. But in a way, this is somewhat of an end run, right? Because we're not saying that you can't spray in this initiative. It doesn't, but we're saying that you can't pollute the watershed, which effectively means that you can't spray, because that would give us an action to challenge the corporate activity without it being on the book that there is a the practice itself is banned. So in some ways, it's also could be an end run around preemption. All right. Without further ado, I think we're going to hand it over to David, who's going to lead us through a presentation on the Middle Fork. And David's getting started. If you have questions, put them in the chat, or at least mention that you have a question, or do the sort of the raise hand sort of deal, and lower your hand when you're done, or just put your hand up and we'll try to see you.
Can everyone see the program?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so tonight's presentation is on the main Willamette River and the Middle Fork, primarily on the Middle Fork. About 25 miles of the Willamette River is in Lane County before it flows northward into Lynn. And we'll just touch on the Willamette River a little bit, and then the Middle Fork itself is just a huge area, covers a lot of land base, and we're just really scratching the surface even with this short presentation. And here's a couple maps. The map on the left shows all the major drainages of the Willamette River, and the map on the right has darkened where the Middle Fork is. So it starts basically in southwest Springfield and goes up towards the Cascade Crest. And I wanted to point out, if you look at the map on the left, just a few of the names of rivers that are tributaries of the Willamette: Clackamas, Tualatin, Yamhill, and a river probably most of you have never heard of, and I hadn't heard of until more recently, and I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Luckiamute,
Yeah.
and Saniam, Kalapuya, and then those I'm pointing out because they come from the names of tribes that were in the Willamette Valley. And this next map shows where location of different tribes. If you look at this area here, you can see the upper Middle Fork was occupied by Southern Molalla, and then the Windfully is identified there, and there's actually a Windberry Creek which might bear resemblance to that. But you look upwards and you see Saniam, Yamhill, Luckiamute, Tualatin as tribes that were there along the Willamette. And few Willamette watershed facts. It's 187 miles long, and as I said, about 25 miles are in Lane County. And I wanted to point out a few things about the discharge, the volume of water. As you can see, the volume from minimum to maximum is like 1,000-fold. So imagine the lowest the Willamette River can get, and the highest, it's 1,000 times more. Just a huge difference, and something you'll see when we get to the middle fork of the Willamette. This minimum volume of Willamette River water measured in Portland, that the average volume of water in the middle fork is almost as much as the minimum is that was recorded for the Willamette River. So there's just a huge difference between water flow between summer and winter, and drought conditions and flood conditions. And just point out that down at the bottom here, it ranks 19th in volume among rivers in the US and contributes 12 to 15% of the total flow of the Columbia River. It's a very significant river. And this is a map of most of the watersheds in Lane County. We borrowed it from Lane County Parks. If you're wondering what this white space over in this lower right corner is, that's the Umpqua drainage that flows through Roseburg, and there are no Lane County parks, so that's why they left it blank. But we're covering Middle Fork here. We covered Coast Fork last month, and the Siuslaw.
We did Siuslaw.
Oh, yeah. And then a long time before that. And this doesn't show the Willamette River clearly, but right here up in this windy little border here is the Willamette River, and on this side is Lynn County, and the Junction City side is Lane County. So Harrisburg is Lynn County on one side, and Junction City is on the Lane County side. And here these photos are from there. This bank on the right, the lower right, is in Harrisburg, and it's Lane County and the Willamette River in front of us on the other side. And this is the Willamette River north of Eugene, before Eugene, and not going to cover a lot. There's the Willamette River obviously goes right through Eugene. This is right on the banks of the Willamette in Springfield when you cross the main road going in from Glenwood into Springfield. This Hexion is a chemical factory that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. It doesn't show it real well, but there are just lots of the typical industrial pipes and tubes and so forth at the facility. And as far as what their contamination for the Willamette River, that could be explored. I'll just point out one thing with pollution that is possible from different sources. The Clean Water Act would regulate pollution from this facility that comes out of pipe, and that's called point source. And but there could also be pollution from runoff from the land base, and that's non-point pollution, and that does not have laws to even limit it. And the non-point source pollution is really a huge thing. as and courts recently ruled that non-point source pollution from logging roads is not under the Clean Water Act and currently can't be regulated. And back to this photo, this is where the Willamette River forms. It's right at the south end of Doris Ranch. The next slide will have a map showing where that is. It's right at the southwest corner of Springfield. And you'll see so right here, this river right here is the Coast Fork, and this is the Middle Fork. And right here at that's Doris Ranch, it's a public park. The river joins in two different segments and is formed. And the Willamette River flows through Eugene, and up here, the Mackenzie River joins in north of Eugene. So some statistics about the Middle Fork Willamette, and that photo is from the headwaters at Tippanagos Lake that's just over the border in Douglas County. And you'll notice land use, 94%, 94.5% of the land use is forest, with 72% public and 28% private. And the 28% private has real significance for pollution for the watershed. And you'll notice again, the difference between the minimum and the maximum discharge is just enormous. And that average is about what the minimum was, as I pointed out earlier, about the main Willamette up in Portland. And as far as communities in the drainage, we'll touch on these other ones, but Fall Creek, Lost Creek, and Jasper are way smaller communities, under 1,000 people. And then there are some larger ones. Besides the Springfield area, way up in the upper left corner, South Springfield, I have not seen estimates of what population is actually of Springfield is in the actual drainage. But the largest community is Pleasant Hill, and then Dexter and Oak Ridge are next in size, and West Fur and Lowell are even much smaller. And there's a Lost Creek community, and Jasper's up here, and Fall Creek is up here. And this is population density. You can see just how thinly populated this is outside of that corridor from Pleasant Hill to Springfield. There's a little section around Oak Ridge, and it's just hugely forest land. And land cover, you can kind of see the same thing. This shows the forest land, a little bit of development, Oak Ridge, and agricultural land right around Oak Ridge. And then here up in the lower stretches along the Dexter Dam going towards Springfield. And land ownership. This kind of spells out where private forest land is. And it might be surprising to a number of people that there are private land in holdings in the Willamette National Forest up here. And those are owned by industrial forest owners. There's also a lot of private industrial land up around Lowell and Dexter and so forth, up Lost Creek. There's checkerboard land here you can see. So all those alternative squares, a lot of them are private, are industrial timberland. And these private timberlands around here used to belong to Pope and Talbot Timber Company in Oak Ridge, and they employed a lot of people, up to 5,000 people in the 80s, but then they overlogged their lands and they basically shut down, and Oak Ridge became impoverished and has been struggling to form alternative economics.
Well, I was wondering, just to point out that where all this private land is around the populated areas. So all the people, most of the people living in this area are vulnerable to being polluted by spray.
Yeah, aerial herbicide spray, because industrial forest land, virtually all of it gets aerial herbicide sprayed after clear cutting, and so it's that way over pretty much all of Lane County and elsewhere in Western Oregon, that the populations are mixed in with industrial forest land and residents get sprayed. And this is of, so this map from the Middle Fork Willamette, the Watershed Council, spells out major tributaries and kind of their categorizations for how they deal with the watershed. Lost Creek is an actual specific drainage. Little Fall Creek here, North Fork of the Middle Fork of the Willamette, Salmon Creek, Salt Creek, Hills Creek, and then the main rest of the Middle Fork of the Willamette going up to, and Timpanogos Lake is up here in the headwaters, just over the border into Douglas County. So we're going to start going upstream and then veer off on different drainages briefly, to give you just a little taste of scenes and so forth in the watershed. Middle Fork near Jasper, just upstream from where it joins with the Coast Fork to form the Willamette. And then here's a really interesting thing. So Fall Creek comes into the Middle Fork of the Willamette just a little ways above there. And very soon you hit into the Fall Creek Dam. And this is a photo on the left of a drawdown that they do in the fall to let out salmon. There's been a real push because of Chinook salmon and other salmon being endangered, and the dam's causing problems for fish, for them to be able to get out, because the main way they'd get out, if the water's too deep, they can't find it, and they don't like going that deep. And if they go out through the turbines, they can get injured. And so salmon numbers have been dropping significantly, and recent lawsuits have forced the Corps of Engineers to do more serious things like this dam drawdown on Fall Creek in the fall, so that the outlets will be not so deep. And the other thing with Fall Creek and a number of other these dams is the only way fish get past them is they actually truck them or transport them around the dam. And then they can actually let them out in the fall if they do this. And this is Fall Creek Reservoir in the lower right in pretty low conditions just quite recently.
Quick set.
And there've been a number of fires in the Fall Creek drainage in the last 15-20 years that have drastically changed it. It's a pretty lush drainage, but a few drought years and fires hitting them and so forth, and a lot more of the drainage has gotten burned, and there's still really lush temperate rainforest sections up Fall Creek, besides scenes like this. And unfortunately, with these fires, you have gotten misguided. Actually, this is old growth forest salvage logging up Fall Creek that was actually taken just in January of 2023. A lot of salvage logging from these recent fires that are just does way more damage and so forth. There's still a fair amount of old growth up well in the whole besides Fall Creek, the whole Middle Fork. And one last photo of Fall Creek. This is around, a number of you might know Bedrock Campground, which was in one of the fires, and it's very different now without trees, but it's a known swimming hole for many years for people around here. One other thing with Fall Creek, which Dee and I have gone up Fall Creek many times, and one of the things I failed to ever get a photo of, but is definitely a risk to water quality and so forth, is numerous people camping right along the stream and hanging out for well longer than the 2-week limits and having garbage and all sorts of stuff just out and right next to the waterways and so forth. And the Forest Service hasn't really adequately regulated that. I'm guessing that our initiative, while those are private parties, the Forest Service could be prodded to address that issue better through our initiative. And here we have Dexter and Lookout Point dams and reservoirs. So you look here, Dexter Reservoir is the first one you come to along 58, and then Lookout Point. And this one down in the lower left is Lookout Point. And the upper right here is the road cutting off from 58 going to Lowell. That's the lake on the left is Dexter Reservoir. And many of you would be familiar with it. There's a covered bridge there and so forth. And this dam on the lower right is also Lookout Point.
Oh, don't forget to notice that lovely
Yes.
clear cut behind that dam.
Yes, the clear cut obviously is right above the reservoir and would feed pollution into the reservoir. And this is right above, off from the reservoir a little ways too, industrial forest land. Any questions or thoughts about how our initiative would affect what you've seen so far? problems and polluting sources, all that kind of thing. Okay, well, I can move on. You know, in terms of like this industrial forest land, this is clearly a business or a corporation, so our initiative would definitely apply here. And looks like they have a long ways to go to relating to nature as if it has rights, right? So the next drainage, North Fork of the Middle Fork, right here, starts right near, flows into the Middle Fork of the Willamette, just outside of Oak Ridge.
You do.
And here's right where the North Fork of the Middle Fork flows into the Middle Fork. That name gets to be quite a mouthful. Few photos along the way, along the North Fork of the Middle Fork.
Oh.
And these are all north of West Fir, a little town along this river.
Is this along the Alpterheim Highway?
Yeah, and some of you might be familiar with this, the road that goes along this as the Ofterheide Road. It's considered a scenic road, and it does have a lot of scenery. Most of it is in national forest land. And this drainage has its headwaters at Waldo Lake. And Waldo Lake is considered to have some of the cleanest and clearest water in the world. And some of you might have heard of threats to Waldo from various sources. It's had a number of fires, but a few years back, there was a big fight to actually get motorboats off of it and that use petroleum. And my understanding right now is that it's only electric motors at most. And then what people can, you know, human powered. Anybody heard anything different with that? No. And then we continue on with the Middle Fork, Willamette upstream from the North Fork, and then going into Salmon Creek. So this is the Highway 58 bridge just before you get into Oak Ridge. And this is the bridge that crosses the river going towards West Fir. And you'll notice here they did two different kind of jetty things that control the direction of the water flow and protect the bridge from getting blown out. And here is right in Oak Ridge. It's not the best photo, but it's right off the highway looking south. This pond and then the next one. are basically gravel pits. They're, as best I can tell, it's the Oak Ridge Sand and Gravel Company. And the middle fork of the Willamette runs right back here. You can barely see it back in there, but it's right off of all these gravel pits. And as far as how well they are regulated and how much runoff, that would be a good question. You can see here, it comes all the way along here. And if you stop right at this certain point on the highway and take a look, you'll be able to see the river right past there, if the lighting's good.
And David, before you go on, I'm sort of watching the chat too for questions, and it
Yeah.
may be a question that you want to defer to later, but Craig is asking, have we done a study prioritizing the various threats to the rivers we're talking about?
Have we done a study on that?
Yeah.
No. We're in the process of identifying as many of the threats as possible, to at least have them really spelled out, because a lot of them aren't even recognized and aren't known to most people. And it's easy to take water for granted, and especially in Western Oregon. And that is changing. There's been more and more news and signs of water problems in Oregon, and more droughts and so forth. So as far as a study and comparing threats, that would be good to have done. I think we'd end up having different people and groups arguing what things are more of a threat than others, and there's many threats, and most or all of them, I think, are important.
But we are compiling a list, and so we
Yeah.
could use actually all of your help. If you see areas that are being damaged, obviously, or whatever, we're compiling a list. We'd love to hear from you so we can add that too, and maybe even go out and photograph things so we can start having a compilation of dangers to our watersheds.
And
Yeah, it'd be great if people could help.
and it's a good question, and also I think a question we ought to re-ask next month too, when we have our guest on water quality too.
Yeah.
Bernadette, you have a question? You're still muted, but yeah, I know you're working on it.
I'm trying, okay.
There you go.
Well, back in the early 90s, so about 30 years ago, I lived out in River Road, north of Eugene, and they were forcing the people there to go on the Eugene's sewer system because they wanted to build a new treatment plant, and they needed more people to justify it and to get millions of dollars in federal money to build this new facility. And so I don't know how current the information was, but that would be worth looking into, of how much a sewage treatment plant like the Eugene one would, serves a lot of people. And when they have too much material coming in, they don't have to even treat it, or they didn't in those days. They could just open the floodgates. And it made me think of the people in Corvallis who are probably still using the Willamette for drinking water source. So that they may be allies in this, even though they're not in Lane County. If the sewage treatment plant is polluting a river that is their source of drinking water.
Good
Great.
points.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Bernadette.
Yeah.
Sure. Probably lots of sewage treatment plants cause water pollution.
Yeah. Yeah, so finding out the what condition the water is in when it leaves the plant would be really good to know. And if there's, I mean, there's so many different things in water that sewage treatment plants don't take out,
Right.
including, you know, different pesticides and pharmaceuticals are becoming way more of a problem and causing all sorts of havoc and within natural systems besides people. But yeah. And so when you're on Highway 58, when you cross this stream, right on the east edge of Oak Ridge, you're actually going over Salmon Creek. And it's just easy to take for granted, oh, maybe that's just a middle fork again. And but the one thing, just it's seems like it's a really common thing for all of us to pay more attention to highway numbers and so forth, and not how they interrelate with rivers and watersheds. So we often don't even know which drainage we just went over on a bridge. And I before doing this, I would have not registered this as Salmon Creek. No. And this is along Salmon Creek, higher up in the drainage, and there's a Salmon Creek Falls that's a ways up there, and then it of course goes into way higher country. And so you can see the Salmon Creek drainage gets very close to Waldo Lake, but Waldo Lake drains out into the North Fork. And yeah, a lot of watersheds have these kind of things where you'd think Waldo Lake would be flowing out Salmon Creek, but it's flowing out the North Fork. And I think I went back. So Salt Creek, we're going to cover next year. And this is real close to where it flows into the middle fork of the Willamette. And it's along Highway 21, which is the turnoff to the Hills Creek Dam. And that's another stream I crossed over and didn't know that it was actually Salt Creek. And this is Salt Creek. Salt Creek, Highway 58 goes along Salt Creek, pretty much all the way to Willamette Pass. So you can see here, all this road grit and whatever pollution's in there is like right next to the stream and can flow in. And farther up Salt Creek, a number of you might be familiar with this Salt Creek Falls. It's actually the second highest single drop waterfall in Oregon, and it's just really close off the highway. And then there's a loop trail and higher up falls you can go to also. And right at the top of Salt Creek, at the pass is Willamette Pass ski area. So the next section is the Hills Creek Dam and Hills Creek itself. And this is just below the dam. And several pictures of the Hills Creek Dam. Most of these dams built in the Middle Fork and in our area were built from the 40s to the 60s. And this is looking downstream right from the dam itself, down the Middle Fork. And then next we have a very beautiful scenic scene here up the Hills Creek. This is right where the reservoir is low and the water level is starting. You can see quite an affected area. And this is the Hills Creek arm that goes up Hills Creek, and a larger arm of the reservoir goes up the main Middle Fork, Willamette. And after you get up past that ugliness, there's things like this, a little gorge with cliffs and lots of moss. Really a beautiful sight as it goes up. This stream, Hills Creek, goes right up to close to the edge of the Diamond Peak Wilderness also. And the next section, which is our last, is from Hills Creek Reservoir up to the headwaters. And this is the upper reservoir water level where it is right now. And, you know, it's obviously low, and where the river actually starts flowing into it. And a couple scenes farther up where it's the river flowing through a reservoir bed that's bare and all that. And a couple scenes farther up from after the reservoir. And notice in this lower right photo, there's a bare spot there with all that snow showing. And that is a clear cut. Clear cuts are really easy to see in the winter if there's snow on them. And this is pretty far up. So just kind of a reminder of this far up in the Willamette National Forest, there are timber sales. This is a timber sale sign right here, a green tag. And a lot of signs here. There's actually a trail along this section of the Middle Fork called the Middle Fork Trail. I don't remember how many miles it goes, but it's a national trail. And it sometimes ends up going along the road, but and just for perspective again, we're up here, and that clear cut we saw is likely one of these private industrial sections. The Forest Service is doing some clear cutting and severe thinning also, so they're kind of bringing that back, and that's more getting to be more of an issue in the Willamette and elsewhere. And this sign, which is incredibly faded out, but you might be able to make out the bottom label is 26 miles to Timpanogos Lake. And you can see a little waterfall coming down through the trees back there. This is along Highway 21. And then we end with Timpanogos Lake, headwaters of the Middle Fork of the Willamette. And it's a popular recreation site, and it's south of the Diamond Peak Wilderness, in its own, I think it's a Cascade recreation area, High Cascade recreation area. And with that, we're done with the show, and I'll stop sharing. And we can open it up to thoughts and questions and yeah, I think I mixed up, so it's 100 times more.
No, 1,000, okay.
Yeah,
The water.
thank you. Yeah,
so.
yeah, but it's still a huge change of volume. Thanks for that correction. Yeah, Craig brings up about the pentaplume. Yes, there's different very hazardous plumes from different industrial things all over Oregon, all over the US. We live in the River Road area of Eugene, and there is a really significant chemical plume from the rail yards that goes under a lot of residences, so they can't safely have wells because they'll be drawing up this toxic water. We're just outside of that. But
Garrett, I think you had a question.
I did, and I'm having a little bit of problem with my audio, so hopefully I won't, you'll be able to hear what I have to say. I just wanted to bring something to the attention of this group that might be of interest and useful. So I live in Eugene, and as you probably heard when you talked about the Mackenzie watershed, the Mackenzie has been the sole source of drinking water in Eugene. But the Eugene Water and Electric Board is actually starting to develop a second source of water right below where the Coast Fork and the Middle Fork come together. So Eugene will be basically taking out potable water, treating it at a facility and using it for drinking water purposes. So, everything that we've talked about in terms of risks and through the watershed is relevant, from a drinking water perspective as well.
yeah.
Thanks, Jared. You came in loud and clear. Craig, you have a question.
Actually, it's more of a comment about that pentaplume. And that pentaplume was discovered about 33 years ago in the 1990s, early 1990s. And what's interesting about it is that Rainbow Water District and Subwater District have put in extensive carbon filtration systems to filter that water because of the pentaplume, which was the result of spraying lumber with penta for 30 or 40 years to keep it looking new. And Rainbow and Sub have actually taken steps to do something about it. eWeb continues to do nothing, even though their intake is miles below where the pentaplume enters the river. And the one comment that I've tried to make to them is that there's a notion called bioaccumulation, which renders minimum exposure totally absurd, because exposure, is accumulative over time. And eWeb continues to ignore and pretend that this is not a problem. So I just wanted to share that information.
Good points.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? I know they were probably pretty close to out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually quarter after, so we could wrap it up. Any thoughts on how our initiative relates to the threats we saw just in this presentation, that to the Willamette and the Middle Fork of the Willamette? For those of us who will be speaking to the public about this, it's just good to kind of have an idea of how our initiative would affect things like this and where it wouldn't affect it. Any thoughts before we close out?
Well, I mean, unless somebody else has something to say who's going to inform us that are outside of the creation of this initiative doesn't go far enough. We know that. And it doesn't stop all the harms that we see. We are really doing our level best to expose some serious dangers here. The thing that I've been noticing in this over this series of educating ourselves about all these disparate watersheds in our very large county is that we have so much in common. There's just so many of the problems that we face in the Siuslaw are the same problems that they face in the Mackenzie. And, you know, so while this is a very large county with different ecoclimates and different geographical formations, we are all being affected seriously by corporate activity, harmful corporate activity, mostly logging for sure. But yeah, we'd love to go further. We'd love to stop all harm, and we're not delusional. So we're taking it from this tact. But if you ever have a thought of how you think we can better explain where we're at with this initiative, and I'm assuming that every one of you will get a clipboard and start gathering signatures, so you're going to have a wrap yourself. But we're developing that. We're developing our talking points, and we're developing our messaging, and we're always looking for a better mousetrap. So if you've got ideas, please send them our way.
Thanks, Michelle. And then I guess we made a lot of announcements early on, but one thing that we forgot to mention is if you were not able to join us at the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference, we had a panel discussion on watersheds and our initiative, and you can easily find that online by just searching up the Community Rights Lane County channel on YouTube. And the panel, which covered the rights of nature as well, just the whole concept, as well as our initiative, is there for the watching if you haven't had a chance to see it. So encourage folks to do that. And then if you have more questions that either you didn't get to bring up tonight or that come up to you in the, you know, as you think about tonight, do send them to us. And you know, because there's a lot of overlap between our topic next month on water quality and what we talked about today. And let's just keep talking about it.
I really want to big up David, though, because wow, you have been taking us through a journey of our own environs in a more fleshed out way, and it's so helpful. I mean, it's embarrassing to me to not know certain things about what's right below my feet or above my head. I mean, we just walk around in our little bubbles, but you really have done a great job educating us. So thanks so much, David.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. That's a good point, David. You have carried a lot of the weight of our watershed series, so thank you.
Sure.
And thanks everybody for being here. It's great to be here, spending some of our time tonight with you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.